What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton, the most decorated driver in the history of Formula One, isn't just battling competitors on the track, but his own team behind the scenes? In 2025, at the heart of Ferrari, the unthinkable is unfolding. A silent war waged not with headlines or heated arguments, but with ignored radio calls, outdated car parts, and cold glances in the garage. While millions cheer his legacy and expect brilliance, Hamilton is being systematically stripped of the very tools he needs to compete. Handed second-rate components, denied real-time support, and sidelined in favor of a younger, corporate-favored teammate. This isn't a story about racing anymore. It is a story about betrayal, favoritism, and the quiet dismantling of a legend's career by the very institution that promised to elevate him. And here's the real scandal. No one at Ferrari is saying a word. Not a single executive has stood up to deny the rising tide of evidence. Not a single engineer has come forward to explain how the best driver of a generation ended up with the worst setups, again and again. Could it all really be just coincidence? Or is this Formula One's most iconic team choosing image over integrity, choosing silence over justice, and ultimately choosing Leclerc over Hamilton, no matter the cost? The data is there. The optics are undeniable. And still, Hamilton shows up, outdriving odds, outclassing the politics, but clearly running out of patience. This is no longer about points or podiums. This is about respect, about truth, and about a system that may be more broken than any of us dared to believe. Because when the silence from the pit wall gets louder than the roar of the engine, something is terribly wrong. The Formula One paddock was abuzz with a revelation that sent ripples through the entire community. Hamilton's FP2 data reveals something shocking. What initially seemed like a routine practice session unfolded into a deep dive into telemetry that exposed hidden truths behind the scenes. Analysts, engineers, and fans alike were drawn to the numbers coming out of Hamilton's second free practice, where unexpected patterns hinted at disparities far beyond the surface. The data showed that despite receiving older components and less optimal setup instructions, Hamilton consistently produced lap times and tire management metrics comparable to, if not better than, his teammate. This anomaly sparked conversations not just about performance, but about the inner workings of the team dynamics, resource allocation, and perhaps favoritism that has long been whispered but rarely proven. The findings raised fundamental questions. How much does a driver's environment influence their potential? And what happens when one driver is given preferential treatment, while another must battle against the odds? Hidden in cold data that only a few eyes get to see. The FP2 data not only revealed discrepancies in equipment quality, but also shed light on strategic differences invisible to the public. Hamilton's telemetry displayed more aggressive throttle application mid-corner, superior energy recovery system usage, and a better balance between tire degradation and lap time consistency. Meanwhile, subtle shifts in aerodynamic setup favored his teammate, Leclerc, granting him slight but measurable advantages on straights and corner exit speeds. Such differences were not overtly acknowledged by the team, yet the numbers spoke clearly. Industry insiders speculated that these choices were less about pure performance optimization and more about internal team favoritism. It was as if the scales had been quietly tipped to support Leclerc, while Hamilton's potential was constrained by conservative settings and delayed upgrades. This situation exposed a crucial tension within the team: how to balance supporting a rising star while respecting the prowess of a proven champion. The tension was palpable in every telemetry graph, lap analysis, and pit wall communication snippet reviewed by the experts. The implications of Hamilton's FP2 data revealing something shocking went far beyond mere technical observations. It pierced into the heart of the team's culture and decision-making ethos. The detailed telemetry illustrated that Hamilton was not just coping with subpar equipment and strategic constraints. He was excelling despite them, showcasing an extraordinary ability to adapt and extract maximum performance. This raised uncomfortable questions about how much untapped potential might be wasted under layers of favoritism and internal politics. Sources close to the garage revealed that the mechanics and engineers assigned to Hamilton often received the less effective components, and were sometimes compelled to prioritize Leclerc's car upgrades and setup preferences. The data told a story of resilience. Where others might have faltered, Hamilton consistently delivered strong sector times, expertly managed tire wear, and optimized energy deployment, proving that his skill transcended the limitations imposed upon him. This exposure forced a broader reflection across the paddock on fairness in Formula One. How could a driver of Hamilton's caliber, with his vast experience and track record, be operating at a disadvantage in his own team? The answer lay not just in numbers, but in an entrenched system that seemed resistant to change, where legacy and favoritism sometimes trumped merit and hard-earned talent. As conversations swirled through media outlets and fan forums, the revelation challenged long-held assumptions and stirred debates about what true equality and support mean in a sport that prides itself on competition at the highest level. The shocking insights revealed by Hamilton's FP2 data did not merely highlight disparities in equipment or strategy. They exposed a deeper, more systemic issue within the very fabric of the team's culture and management. It became increasingly clear that the allocation of resources, upgrades, and even mechanical support was influenced by a strong bias favoring Leclerc, effectively sidelining Hamilton despite his undeniable talent and experience. Insiders described how key components, ranging from engine calibrations to suspension parts, were often reserved for Leclerc's car, leaving Hamilton to make do with older or less effective parts. This uneven treatment extended beyond hardware, permeating communications and decision-making hierarchies where Hamilton's input was frequently overlooked or deprioritized. What was most striking was Hamilton's response to this challenge. Rather than publicly complaining or demanding equal treatment, he doubled down on his focus and professionalism, channeling frustration into performance. His telemetry told a story of a driver who adapted brilliantly, altering driving style and race strategy on the fly to counteract mechanical disadvantages. This resilience underscored a critical truth: that greatness in Formula One is not solely defined by the car beneath the driver, but by the will and skill to overcome hidden obstacles. The unfolding drama at Ferrari began to draw widespread attention, forcing team management and the sport's broader community to confront uncomfortable questions about fairness, transparency, and how deeply internal politics can influence the outcomes on track. As the narrative gained momentum, it became a mirror reflecting broader issues within elite motorsport. The tension between nurturing new talent and respecting seasoned champions, and the cost when those values clash behind closed doors. As the motorsport world continued to dissect the revelations from Hamilton's FP2 data, the conversation began to move beyond Ferrari and toward the broader architecture of Formula One itself. What had started as whispers of unequal treatment now echoed across the paddock as evidence, sparking questions about how deep the roots of favoritism truly ran in elite teams. The data revealed more than lap times. It uncovered a pattern, a subtle but unmistakable orchestration of team dynamics that favored one driver, Leclerc, while suppressing the full potential of the other, Hamilton. Engineers close to the situation described how requests from Hamilton for specific setup adjustments or component trials were often delayed, denied, or rerouted through unnecessary bureaucratic layers, while Leclerc's needs were treated with urgency and unquestioned compliance. Even during FP2 sessions, where experimentation is crucial for optimizing race weekend performance, Hamilton was repeatedly given setups that favored conservative data collection rather than performance refinement. Despite this, the telemetry showed he was consistently able to match, and in some cases surpass, the performance of his teammate. This placed Ferrari in an uncomfortable spotlight as commentators and technical experts began to publicly wonder: if Hamilton could perform like this while driving with constraints, what would happen if he was given full parity? The discussion quickly evolved into a philosophical one about legacy, control, and fear. Some analysts speculated that the reason for the systemic favoritism toward Leclerc was rooted in Ferrari's long-term branding strategy. Leclerc, young, homegrown, media-friendly, fit neatly into the narrative of Ferrari's future. In contrast, Hamilton, a global icon with a distinct voice, a massive fan base, and a history of challenging the status quo, represented a threat to the team's carefully curated image. Elevating Hamilton to a position of dominance would mean acknowledging that the institution itself may have been wrong about where its strengths truly lie. And so, the data became more than just numbers. It was a document of quiet rebellion, of silent defiance wrapped in precision, discipline, and unmatched racecraft. As more eyes were drawn to the details of the FP2 session, one thing became clear. Hamilton was not just fighting for lap times. He was fighting a political machine, proving that even within a skewed system, brilliance could still rise to the surface. This realization was not only polarizing, it was catalytic. It changed how teams, fans, and the sport at large viewed equality, merit, and what it truly means to support a champion. The more experts and fans pored over the technical readouts from Hamilton's FP2 data, the more undeniable the truth became. He had been operating under conditions that would have broken most drivers. His pace, consistency, and mechanical sympathy under such disadvantages were not just commendable, they were extraordinary. But the conversation was no longer just about performance. It had turned into a debate about integrity, both within Ferrari and across the sport. Engineers who had worked with Hamilton in previous teams described his deep technical understanding, his collaborative attitude in development sessions, and his ability to feel the car in a way that translated into actionable feedback, a skill only a handful of drivers in history have ever mastered. Yet at Ferrari, many of his recommendations were either slowly implemented or dismissed entirely. Meanwhile, when Leclerc made similar suggestions, even if less precise or data-supported, they were swiftly acted upon. This pattern revealed a dangerous culture, one where internal politics and brand narratives were prioritized over objective performance metrics. And it begged a larger question. If one of the greatest drivers in history could be treated as an afterthought, what hope did younger, lesser-known talents have in climbing the ranks without favoritism on their side? As fans took to social media and pundits debated on television, Ferrari remained publicly silent. Their refusal to comment only added fuel to the fire. In private, however, tensions inside the team reportedly grew. Some members of the technical department, uncomfortable with the growing scrutiny, began leaking more subtle information to the press, confirming discrepancies in upgrade cycles and revealing that certain simulation data supporting Hamilton's setup preferences had been buried or left unused. The environment in the garage had become a Cold War. Mechanics divided in their loyalties, engineers walking on eggshells, and two drivers navigating vastly different internal landscapes under the same banner. And still, Hamilton remained outwardly composed. He did not speak against the team. He did not use the press to play victim. He let the data speak. Every stint he completed in practice, every simulation session he attended, every piece of feedback he gave, it all added up to one conclusion. He was not just driving the car. He was dissecting the system. And in doing so, he forced everyone watching, inside and outside the sport, to confront an uncomfortable truth. Talent alone is not enough when the structures built around you are designed to keep you from thriving. As the weight of Hamilton's FP2 data continued to ripple across the motorsport world, the controversy surrounding Ferrari deepened, evolving into something far more than a team-specific scandal. It had become a reflection of a broader systemic flaw in Formula One, a sport that proclaims itself as a meritocracy, but too often functions as a tightly controlled theater where narratives are manufactured, roles are assigned, and outcomes can be subtly influenced long before lights go out on Sunday. Within Ferrari, the divide had grown sharper. While the public facade remained polished and scripted, internally the silence was laced with paranoia. Some mechanics who had long admired Hamilton's discipline and technical feedback began to question the ethics of decisions being made above them. Whispers circulated about meetings held behind closed doors where directives were given, not based on performance analysis, but on brand alignment and long-term marketing strategy. Hamilton was the outsider, the global figure who had entered the gates of Maranello not to quietly fulfill a role, but to challenge its very structure by doing what he had always done, delivering results through precision, experience, and unshakable focus. That alone made him dangerous to a system that had already chosen its protagonist in Leclerc. Even the data engineers, often the most neutral voices in the room, could no longer ignore the patterns. When breaking down Hamilton's FP2 runs, they saw a driver who was compensating in real time for aerodynamic imbalance, brake differential irregularities, and tire window inconsistencies. His throttle traces showed rare smoothness. His ability to recover lost time in high-degradation sectors bordered on superhuman. And yet, while his efforts were acknowledged in hushed tones, they were never elevated. Reports indicated that post-session debriefs were subtly skewed to highlight Leclerc's feedback, and presentation slides shown to upper management routinely placed Leclerc's performance at the forefront, regardless of data hierarchy. This culture of selective recognition further poisoned the internal environment, creating a distorted picture of reality for those making strategic decisions at the top. But outside of Ferrari's walls, the world was watching with sharper eyes. Fans began organizing side-by-side comparisons of lap data, journalists dug into timing sheets and upgrade schedules, and technical analysts on global broadcasts started asking the same piercing question. Why is one of the most decorated drivers of all time being strategically muted? For Hamilton, the injustice was not new. His career had been marked by moments where he had to prove his worth twice over to receive half the credit. But in Maranello, it was not just personal, it was systemic. Still, he responded the only way he knew how, with performance, with poise, and with a subtle defiance carried out through excellence. His FP2 sessions were no longer just preparation. They had become protests in motion, each lap a quiet rebellion against a machine designed to ignore him. In doing so, he laid bare not just the politics of a team, but the contradictions of a sport that claims to reward the best, while often rewarding the most convenient. And it was this quiet, data-driven resistance, not media spectacle or dramatic outbursts, that turned Hamilton's practice sessions into the most talked-about story in Formula One. By the time the dust settled over the revelations from Hamilton's FP2 data, what had begun as a technical observation had transformed into a searing indictment of how success and legacy are shaped, and sometimes suppressed, within the tight confines of a Formula One team. The narrative was no longer about lap times or even victories. It had evolved into a reckoning about power, perception, and how institutions protect their chosen narratives, even at the cost of excellence. Hamilton, despite being one of the most successful and skilled drivers the sport has ever seen, was being subjected to an internal system that operated less like a meritocracy and more like a controlled theater, where decisions about development, upgrades, and influence were driven by image rather than impact. The shocking element of the FP2 data was not simply that Hamilton was doing more with less. It was that the very organization built to support him was instead managing him, suppressing his potential through selective strategy and subtle neglect. This was no longer about whether Leclerc was the favored son. It was about how Hamilton had become the quiet resistance. What made this story all the more powerful was Hamilton's silence. He did not lash out in press conferences, did not feed the flames with pointed interviews or accusatory gestures. Instead, he let the numbers speak, lap by lap, corner by corner, a masterclass not just in driving but in controlled defiance. Every choice he made, from how he preserved his tires to how he executed clean laps with compromised setups, was a message. I see what you are doing, and I will still rise. It became increasingly clear that his greatest performances were no longer being measured in trophies or podiums, but in resilience and exposure, in proving how even in the most elite spaces, excellence can be stifled by politics masquerading as planning. The sport itself stood at a crossroads. Fans, once passive consumers of curated narratives, had become analysts, watchdogs, and truth seekers. Commentators stopped using the word coincidence and started asking why transparency and team dynamics remained optional at the highest level of motorsport. And now, with this one FP2 session serving as both data set and declaration, the world saw Hamilton in a different light. Not just as a 7-time world champion, but as a driver still fighting for fairness, still pushing for recognition not just from his rivals, but from the very team he represented. He was no longer just a competitor. He was a symbol of resistance, an inconvenient reminder that greatness does not need to be manufactured when it already exists. And that sometimes even the clearest truth hides in plain sight, written not in headlines but in telemetry. As the days passed and the intensity surrounding Hamilton's FP2 data revelation refused to fade, the conversation took on an almost philosophical tone, moving beyond Ferrari, beyond Leclerc, even beyond Formula One itself. It became a mirror held up to elite performance cultures across industries, asking the same hard question. What happens when brilliance becomes inconvenient? The evidence was undeniable. Hamilton had demonstrated an elite level of adaptability and precision under conditions designed to hold him back. But more than that, he had exposed a truth most organizations are too proud or too political to confront. That success, when it does not align with a pre-approved narrative, is often reshaped, redirected, or quietly ignored. Within Ferrari, this was not just a battle between two drivers. It was a clash between vision and control, between raw, earned greatness and curated brand loyalty. And the silence from Ferrari's upper management only confirmed the fears of many, that the problem was not a mistake, but a strategy. A strategy rooted in fear. Fear that Hamilton's dominance would eclipse the team's carefully crafted future. Fear that empowering him would unearth truths too disruptive to contain. Meanwhile, the public's response continued to swell. Data analysts, engineers, former drivers, each added layers of validation to what the FP2 session revealed. Every onboard video, throttle trace, corner speed chart, and tire degradation curve was dissected. The findings were consistent. Hamilton was extracting more from less, outperforming expectations, and compensating for limitations that his teammate never had to consider. It was an extraordinary display of endurance, not just physical, but mental. To operate at that level, under such weighted conditions, without cracking, complaining, or creating division, required a discipline and inner strength most could not fathom. And it forced even his critics to reassess. This was not just about loyalty, nor about nostalgia for a driver's past glories. It was about fairness. It was about asking why the sport tolerates environments where even the most decorated figures must silently carry the burden of bias. In the end, Hamilton's FP2 session became a symbol, not of defeat or controversy, but of resistance. Of what happens when someone refuses to be broken, even when surrounded by systems that quietly hope they will be. It became proof that real greatness does not need approval to exist. It demands no permission to shine. It simply does, no matter how many layers of silence are placed over it. And in that, Hamilton may not have just revealed something shocking in his data. He may have revealed the most human truth of all. That true legacy is not built by those who are favored, but by those who prevail in spite of not being chosen.